Okay, so making progress here. Let's look at what we have to do in our list. So we've done all of this, done our intro level, player movement, player rotation. We did a little bit of extra in the middle. We did lighting and post processing. We did our enemy and nav mesh. So we got our enemy chasing our player around the map now. So next thing we have to do is shooting, which is a lot of fun. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to instantiate a bullet or like a little prefab and shoot it across the room and make it hit the enemy, and then we'll say when it hits the enemy we'll destroy the enemy, and then we'll move on to spawning from there. Okay, so what we got to do before we do that, there's one thing that's been annoying me and I forgot to do that in my rendering and lighting setup. So if we hit play and watch this, okay, so when we're looking around here, it's kind of okay. But as soon as I move over to the tunnel system, look, you can actually see the external unrendered environment outside here and in these gaps inside here, right? So that's kind of breaking the immersion a little bit. So what we could do to fix that, just so I can show you, I'll pause the game while it's in play mode. If we go into our camera and we say, for this particular game, we don't want a skybox. So if you click on that and you say, I want a solid color, then you can actually pick the color that's being rendered out here. So you could do something a bit crazy like that if you wanted, or make it like a dark green or something like that, just give it a little bit of contrast. Or you can make it just jet black, which gives a real sense of you know, I suppose fear or, you know, loneliness when you're looking around inside here. So that's completely entirely up to you. I'm going to go with, let me just have a look at these. That's kind of cool as well, that dark red there, that's pretty cool. But like, something about the black, it just kind of cuts nicely and blends in with everything. Yeah, I'm going to stick with the black, right? So because I'm in play mode, I'm going to have to reset that again. So I have to go from skybox to solid color, and then I'm going to make that jet black. There we go. And that fixes that problem for us. Okay, so moving on to shooting. The first thing I gotta do is create a bullet, so something that can actually shoot. So if we go to 3D object, I'm going to make this out of a sphere. So there's my sphere, and I make it size tiny, so 0.1 by 0.1 by 0.1. Let's see if that's big enough to see. So if I put that position at 0, 0, and 0, there it is being rendered inside our game. I think that's big enough. It's almost like a snowball. We might need to make it smaller. Okay, so it's going to be thrown across the room essentially. Bullets are kind of thrown using forces. Well, physical ones like this. Then there's also, obviously we could do ray casting to say, look, I shot you. You could do that as well. But we've already done some ray casting. I'm going to show you some projectiles now. So this sphere, I'm going to call it bullet. Because it's using physics, I need to add the rigid body component. Rigid body, like so. And then I need to add a script called bullet. So create C# script. I'm doing that inside my scripts folder. Bullet. And by the way, guys, just to recap, I'm right clicking here and then clicking create. Okay, there's lots of different ways you can do this. You can use game object up here, create. You can add scripts directly to objects if you want to. Like I could click on this bullet and say add component and then type in bullet or whatever. I've already created it, but you could click on new script and create it from there if you want. So look, I've just added the bullet script through there. I could have dragged it as well. I could have dragged it too. So there's lots of different ways. As you practice with Unity, you'll find what you're comfortable with. So I've got my bullet script attached to my bullet. I've got my rigid body attached as well. So that's all I need. It's got a collider on there. Now I'm going to do something interesting. I'm going to create a new folder called prefabs. So this is our first prefab, which is a prefabricated object. Basically, you're making a class or fabricated object that you can clone and use and kind of use wherever you need. So you can clone it from the folder, and we're going to shoot it across the room. Sorry for the sound effects. My dog has decided to have a little drink of water here beside me, and he's really really noisy. He just woke up. Okay, so I'm going to continue on. Prefabs folder, let's put our bullet inside that. So this is basically a prefabricated object that we're going to clone from this folder, not from here, but we're going to clone it from here and use it whenever we click on the trigger button or fire the weapon. So I'm going to drag the bullet into the prefabs folder, and then I'm going to switch this one off because I don't need it just for now. I can leave it in scene, but leave it switched off. Okay, it might be handy later on. This is the one we got to focus on now. So next I need to shoot this bullet. Okay, so I'm going to do that from my player, so I may as well go back to my scripts folder and create another script called player shooting. Player movement, and now we've got player shooting. It's going to be a separate script. So we've got the bullet script and the player shooting script. I'm going to double click on the player shooting and the bullet script there. I'm moving, by the way, back and forth between Visual Studio and Unity just like that by holding Alt and Tab. So hold down Alt and tap Tab. It makes things a lot easier for you to actually move back and forth. Otherwise, you're gonna do what I see a lot of my students doing, and they reach down here and they click on this, and then they reach down and click on this, and it's just it's time consuming, you know. And with development, you know, you gotta find as much time as possible to cut things down time wise, like with any job. My player shooting script, in here I'm going to listen out for a left click of my mouse button, and then I'm going to instantiate or create an instance of my prefab and then shoot it across the room. So how do I do that? Well, I need to create a reference to my bullet. So public game object bullet prefab. Okay. Then I need to I'm going to create a shoot function just like we did with our move and rotate functions. So void shoot. Okay. So in the update, I want to say if input.get mouse button down 0. If I click the left mouse button, I want to shoot. So if I click the left mouse button, sorry, left mouse button is denoted by a 0. It's kind of confusing. But if you say, if I get the left mouse button, or get mouse button down 0, that's left, then I shoot. If I put a 1 in there, that's a right click, and I think a 2 is the middle if you push down the roller as well. So what do I do when I shoot? Well, I need to create an instance of this. So I'm going to create my own bullet, a local bullet. Bullet is equal to game object dot instantiate bullet prefab. Then I've got to say, okay, well, where do I want to instantiate the bullet prefab? Where does it go? I want to say bullet is bullet dot transform dot position is equal to transform dot position. It's equal to the player's transform dot position, not where I actually created the first prefab at 0, 0, 0. It's actually at the same position as the player. Then I need to say I want it to shoot forwards. So I need to get something to do with the bullet to add physics to it. So we put a rigid body on our bullet. So I can actually get the component, the rigid body component, off our bullet and add a force to that. So bullet.get component rigid body, and then we want to add a force. Add force. What direction do we want to shoot in? Well, we want to shoot in the forward direction of our player. We want to shoot in the same direction that our player is facing. Okay, so we're going to add a force at transform dot forward, just like we did with our movement script. But we're going to multiply that by, let's multiply it by 400. And that's the force that we're going to use. So let's just see what happens when we use this. So don't forget we created a reference to our bullet prefab. We've got to drag that in. But we're not going to drag it in from the scene. We're going to drag it in from our prefabs folder, just like this. So in our player controller, or our player object, down the bottom, you'll see nothing because I haven't added the script yet. So let's drag the player shooting script onto our player in here, or you can do it on here. There's player shooting, and look, it's waiting for a bullet prefab. That's what we created there, bullet prefab. Unity actually splits up the name and puts a capital in for you. I always do the kind of camel case notation or naming convention. Unity actually splits that up for you. It's kind of clever like that. So we need to drag our bullet prefab into here. So that's inside our prefabs folder. And we need to drag that bullet we created earlier into there. So now our player shooting script knows we need to copy that bullet prefab here. We need to create an instance of it, set its position to our player position, and then add a force to it through its own rigid body along the forward direction of our player. So let's see if that works. Okay, so I'm facing over here, and there we go. As you can see, I can shoot stuff now. Something strange though, you can see that my player is bouncing backwards, and these balls are doing absolutely nothing. They're doing no good. Alright. Right. Oh yeah, he's in the way of the lighting there. That's kind of interesting. Okay, so first of all these balls, that's no good. They can't just be sitting around the game like this, you know, so it'll get very taxing on the system, and also it's just messy, kind of stupid looking. So let's deal with that first. So in our bullet script, we're going to say that when the bullet hits something, when it collides with anything, it destroys itself. Okay? So void on collision enter. When this bumps into something, destroy game object. Destroy the game object that this script is attached to, being the bullet. So destroy the bullet, this game object. So now when I hit play and I shoot something, well look, do you know what? We're not even seeing the bullet now. Do you know why? It's because, and the clue is in the movement of the player. When I click, 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 the player is moving because the bullet is being instantiated at the same position as our player, which means that the bullet is colliding with the player instantly, it's self-destructing, and it's also applying a physics collision to our player. That's why the player is moving backwards. So we need to do something about that. Let's look at our bullet. So here's our bullet prefab. Let's open the prefab and let's give it a layer. We're going to put the bullet on a layer that's different to the player. Okay, so I'm going to click on layer, add layer, and we'll call this bullet. And then I'm going to apply that layer. So layer, bullet. So now all of the bullet prefabs are on the bullet layer. Then I'm going to go to my player and I'll do the same thing. Layer, add layer, and I'll call this player. Now the reason why we're doing this is because if you put objects on different layers, there's a cool system in the physics settings of Unity. So back to my player, sorry. I'm going to change the layer to player. Do I want to change children? Yes, I do, because it's only the spotlight that's inside there to worry about. So the physics system in Unity allows you to have certain layers not interact with each other. So to access that, we want to go to Edit, Project Settings, and go to Physics. And inside here at the bottom, you've got all this stuff like gravity. There's the value for gravity, that's the speed at which you fall, and your bounce thresholds, all that kind of cool stuff. You might need to modify these if you're ever doing a physics-based game, but you don't like the reality of physics, where you want to gamify it slightly. So looking in here, we've got this matrix, and these are actually the layers that we're just looking at. So you've got all the default ones, and even post-processing from earlier, the previous tutorial. There's the bullet, and there's the player that we just created. And you'll also see the same layers down this side. So let's say that the player can never collide with its own bullet. And let's say that the bullet itself can never collide with its own bullet as well. So a bullet will never collide with another bullet. Okay? So bullet and bullet. I believe that's correct. So the player can't hit the bullet and the bullet can't hit the bullet. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And then anything else that you don't want to collide, you just create separate layers. It's as simple as that. So that was in the Edit, Project Settings, Physics. Cool. So now That just pops up. All right. So now, I'll just save that quickly. We should be able to fire a bullet, and look, when it hits something, it disappears. And something else that's going on with our bullet, if I just push this menu up this way and start shooting, you'll see that, look, it's actually falling onto the ground. So that's something else in our prefab. We've set the bullet to use rigid bodies, but in part of a rigid body, you've also got gravity to contend with. So let's go into the actual prefab itself, open the prefab, and in its rigid body, you can see, look, use gravity is ticked automatically. Let's turn that off. Bullets shouldn't fall that close. So adding that force it's a nice kind of cartoony bullet speed. Whenever it hits something, it'll disappear. And I believe, we're actually seeing reflections of the bullets in other parts of the screen there. Yeah, that's all set up nicely. So basically, anything that it hits, it'll disappear and it'll destroy itself. But we've also got some extra information here, right? So we've got a character called enemy here. This is where we can use the debug.log to actually see what our bullets are hitting. So if we go to bullet, and in its onCollisionEnter function, this is called whenever the bullet actually collides with something. Just before we destroy it, let's see exactly what it's hitting. Let's say debug.log collision dot, I think you can just say dot name, no, dot gameObject.name here, gameObject.name. So this will tell us the name of the thing that it's actually colliding with. This collision is passed into this function by Unity whenever an object collides with something. So this collision is actually the data about the actual collision, including the object that it hit. So here is where we're going to decide later on to deal damage to our enemy. So let's just figure out exactly what we're hitting here. So if I say look for the name of what we're hitting, and down here on this line here you'll see the debug.log, or we can actually open it. We'll go to Window, General, and Console. And let's dock that just here. And now look, when I start shooting things, that's interesting, it's not saying anything. Huh. So I know it's hitting things. So let's save debug.log collision gameObject.name. That's strange. So it doesn't seem to be actually hitting anything. If I go to my scene view, just want to make sure these bullets aren't flying through the actual scenery, are they? Oh, they are. Right, so they're not actually hitting anything at all. That's weird. Why is that? All this time I thought they were actually destroying themselves, but they're not. Okay, so we got a little bit of problem to solve here. What is it? onCollisionEnter. So that's not happening. Have I turned off the bullet collider maybe? Mesh renderer, sphere collider, rigid body, use gravity. So maybe I set something in the actual physics settings. Let me just check that. That could be something silly. I might have turned off the default. So edit, project settings, physics. Alright, so a bullet. I've said it doesn't actually collide with the default layer. That's silly. Sorry, the default layer is everything else. Alright, so I unticked that. I just wanted to say the bullet shouldn't collide with another bullet or the player. Okay, that's the problem right there. Cool. So back to where I was. So the console itself, let's hit play and let's see exactly what we're hitting. There, so I'm hitting the tunnel. Here I'm hitting the room lower. You can see all the names appearing up above. And this should, oh look, here's the enemy. Let's see, yep, I can hit the enemy, cool. And let's just check that we are actually destroying. Yes, no, in some cases we're not, which is very strange. Room upper. enemy. So right, some parts of the actual geometry, the mesh collider, it's actually letting the bullets shoot through, which is kind of worrying. I haven't seen that before. So yeah, these two boxes, this one here and this one here, it might be because of the way we messed around with the geometry at the very start. Not to worry, it's hitting there, but we don't need to worry about that just right now. It's hitting most of the points, and it's actually detecting the enemy, which was the key thing. So you can see here that it hit the enemy a couple of times, which is just what we wanted. So what I'm going to do, just for safety, is in my bullet, I'm going to say at the start, destroy. This is the cool thing about the destroy function. You say destroy game object itself after, let's say, 3 seconds. I mean, it shouldn't take longer than 3 seconds for our bullet to hit anything in the scene anyway. So let's have it self-destruct after 3 seconds, just so that we don't start generating bullets that go on to infinity, okay? And they just go off outside the scene and go on forever. So, destroy game object after 3 seconds. But here's the interesting part. Let's say if collision dot game object dot name is equal to enemy. So if I hit the enemy, or if I hit an object called enemy, we can also say destroy collision dot game object. So what this will do, I think you'll guess, is just before the bullet destroys itself, it'll say, well, it'll say the name of the thing that's hit. We can get rid of that. That's just for debugging purposes. If we hit something called enemy, destroy the thing called enemy. So this is literally going to obliterate it from the Unity scene, right? So this isn't necessarily how you would do it in a game. You might use animations or something to do it in the game, right? Oh, there he is. Bang. And he's gone. Look at that. And now we've got nothing else to do but walk around shooting things. So that brings us into our next section. So we're going to talk about, in the next section, we're going to talk about spawning, which is how we actually spit out more enemies. And that will probably take us on to the next part as well, which is the game logic. We're going to do a little bit of both of these. So spawning, we're actually going to instantiate more enemies. Okay, so that's something to look forward to in the next section. Thanks.